I thought maybe I'm just crazy. Those are the words of Carrie Turner, and it's probably a thought that we've all had at some point in our lives. But for Carrie Turner, the threats against her and her family were absolutely real. The knowledge that somebody was out to harm her was the absolute truth. The fact that her infant child could be caught up in the violence that stalked Carrie was a constant concern. It was a concern so pressing that Carrie voluntarily turned over custody of her child to family in an attempt to protect them from the people that seemed hell-bent on harming her. Thinking she was crazy? That was because she began to suspect that the people to whom she had given custody of her own child might actually be the very same people that were instigating the violence and threats to which she had been subjected. And that person was her very own father, former Laurel Police Chief David Michael Crawford. We've all heard how Crawford allegedly retaliated for perceived wrongs by lighting cars and garages on fire. We've already heard how he targeted his own nephew and stepson as a result of petty family dramas. But the crimes Carrie accused her father of in court to regain custody of her child after David's arrest, they are another level of horror. And if Carrie's allegations are true, it wouldn't be a stretch to suggest that David Crawford might be a psychopath that had a more than 30-year police department career. Today, we uncover some of the most disturbing allegations in the David Crawford saga on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes and bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And someday I'll be a real boy.
Excellent. I liked it.
I'm still in negotiations with Stromboli. He won't let me out of this bird cage. But if he ever does, my fans are going to unite and we're going to revolt against the system.
We would like to thank each and every one of our listeners, and especially everyone that has taken the time out of their day to make the effort to leave us a 5-star rating and review. Those ratings and reviews are the most helpful way to support the podcast. Other ways we'd appreciate your support include subscribing to our YouTube channel and following us on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We would greatly appreciate your efforts to comment on content you see from us and reshare it with your friends and followers. Every social media interaction helps us grow our audience, and growing a podcast from the ground up takes a huge amount of resources, so every single time you interact with us, it is a gift, and we thank you for it. My DMs are open for feedback, and if you have concerns or critiques, you can always reach out to me through our social media or our email address, crimetoburn@gmail.com. We would greatly appreciate the chance to address any concerns you have before you leave us a low rating or negative review. And before we go any further, I want to give a couple of shout-outs. If you're not listening to Missing in Hushtown, please go do that. It is a podcast that covers an unsolved case in a small town in Tennessee of Jennifer and Adriana Wicks, and it is a very important case that needs to be heard. We've also talked before about the podcast Like Mother, Like Murder. They've shouted us out a few times in their episodes, and we are so very grateful. And recently, Never Light Up a Room podcast gave us the kindest shout out. Megan, one of the hosts, is a listener, and so thank you so much, Megan. Before we get into these insane allegations that we're going to be covering today, I want to make this exceptionally clear. These are not my allegations. They are the allegations made by Carrie, David Crawford's daughter. I don't know if they are true. I am presenting them from a newspaper article that appeared in the Washington Post and another that appeared in the Baltimore Sun, and a television interview that Carrie did for a Maryland news channel. In these allegations, Carrie also makes some allegations against Mary Crawford, who we've already discussed is Dave's wife, and she's an attorney. I want to reiterate that I'm not accusing Mary Crawford of any knowledge or participation in any of the crimes that police have charged her husband with, nor of any of the activities that we're going to be discussing today that Carrie alleges against her father. I do not have any police records of these events. I do not know if police have charged anyone in relation to these crimes. I do know that the police did comment on those newspaper articles that they were investigating these crimes. If anyone knows if there's been any movement on charges related to these allegations, you can reach out to us through social media or crimetoburn@gmail.com. I'm happy to keep you anonymous if you wish. It's also important to note that these are not associated with the arson cases that David's been charged with, convicted in, or accused in. These are a completely separate issue, and none of this information was presented in the trial that we've been discussing that occurred in Howard County. So the jury never heard any of this. But I feel like the level of violence alleged in these instances needs to be included in this podcast, because if these allegations are true, I think they really strengthen the argument that Crawford was capable of violence, and that he had a disregard for human life, and that he was the kind of person capable of harming his own family.
And not only that, but there's a lot of this is going to be something you can't just bring up on a Wikipedia page.
Right. And a trigger warning before we get rolling here. There are some themes of domestic violence that we're going to be discussing today, so I'm just giving you a heads up. Now, I'm not going to be discussing any specific instances of domestic violence because I don't have any specifics, but there's definitely some strong overtones, and so I just want to give a warning in case you would find that disturbing.
We know you sick bastards are here for all that.
Grab your Gnarls Barkley CD, because today we're going crazy. We're heading back to 2006. So we're headed back to 2006. This is a time when Pluto had been freshly demoted to a dwarf planet, Twitter had just been launched, and the world was freshly mourning the sad loss of the crocodile hunter Steve Irwin.
R.I.P. Steve.
And Dave Crawford's daughter Carrie had just become a mother to a beautiful baby in September of that year. Carrie's dad, Dave Crawford, was at this time serving as the police chief in Laurel, Maryland, and he had not yet begun the infamous alleged arson spree that this series is all about. Now, weeks after Carrie gave birth to her baby, her husband at the time, a man named Ray Truelove, the baby's father, allegedly threatened to kill her.
What if you married a guy named Truelove? Can you think what would go through your mind? I'm marrying my...
Truelove? Yeah.
I kind of want to marry him.
I don't think you do.
Oh. Maybe?
So he was arrested just weeks after the baby was born for threatening to kill Carrie. And he was thrown in jail for several months. Now, it would appear that despite the threats against her that landed him in jail, when he was released, Carrie allowed him to return home after his release. Now, I don't know the status of their relationship at that point. However, based on other information provided through press interviews with Carrie, it appears to be implied that the relationship between Carrie and her then husband was tumultuous at best, based on the information I have. And I think it's a reasonable assumption that Carrie may have been suffering some domestic abuse, because after she and Truelove divorced, she did become a domestic abuse advocate. However, that is my extrapolation from those facts that are provided in the news, and they're not corroborated fact.
It's not a bad theory.
So it's at this point that David Crawford, remember he's a police chief, and his wife Mary, who is at this time a county prosecutor, file an emergency complaint for custody of Carrie's baby in early 2007. The grounds for their complaint is that the home where Carrie and her alleged abusive husband that had threatened to kill her live is an unstable environment, and it would be best for the baby to be removed from Carrie's custody. Now, this petition for temporary custody was granted, and Dave and Mary took the baby. Now, do you recall the diaper changing incident where Miriam Sherstrom says she was expected to change a diaper at the Crawford house because she has 2 X chromosomes?
Yeah.
This is that baby. So the custody agreement stipulated that Carrie was to be allowed to see her daughter on alternate weekends. So sometime in 2008, which would have been more than a year into Dave and Mary taking custody of the baby, the night before one of those scheduled visitations, someone drove to the home that Carrie shared with her husband in York, Pennsylvania, and shot up her husband's truck. According to the news article, at the time there had been some tension with a neighbor, and it was thought that it might be retaliation of some sort over some sort of incident that the report does not define. It appears from press coverage that at this time, Carrie and her husband believed they were being targeted by a York, Pennsylvania gang known as the York Boys, B-O-Y-Z.
What's a Z? That's how you know they're serious.
This event apparently scared Carrie and her husband enough that they relocated to Odenton, Maryland to live with Carrie's mother, which was over an hour away from where they'd lived in York, where the truck had been shot up. Now, just days after moving in with Carrie's mother, it happened again. someone shot up the truck, and this time they reportedly left a gas can sitting on the truck. Now, Odenton is only about 10 miles from Laurel, and I can attest that the Odenton Fire Department used to put on one hell of a pig pickin', and when I was a volunteer in PG County, we always looked forward to going to that pig pickin' in Odenton. But that's neither here nor there. So, obviously, the police are called, and now we begin to suspect the first shooting of the truck is probably not the neighbor that they'd suspected, because this is over an hour away from there. The addition of the gas can is just confusion, like why? And while the police are on the scene investigating, guess who shows up? David Crawford, in his Laurel Police Department uniform, to confer with the local police on what's going on. Man, I wish I knew how that conversation went.
Is Odenton like where you go to live a mundane life after Valhalla?
Are we talking Norse mythology? Because I don't know.
Leave a comment.
So Dave Crawford shows up. Now, Carrie reports that after this incident, Dave and Mary began denying her access to her daughter altogether, despite the custody agreement that she was supposed to have visitation alternate weekends. Now, I don't know if Crawford was able to get the court to revoke that visitation, or if he was just not allowing Carrie and her then-husband access in violation of the custody agreement, but the article states that Crawford cited a dangerous environment associated with Carrie and her then-husband as the reason he wouldn't let them have access to their child. So why would Crawford want to deny his daughter access to her child, citing danger to the child, if he was the one perpetrating the danger? Well, Carrie alleges that just days before the shooting, she and her husband had gotten into a, quote, terse exchange, unquote, with Mary Crawford. Now, I want to reiterate here that even though the exchange that Carrie is alleging as the motive for her dad's actions is a conversation with Mary, no one is suggesting that Mary had any knowledge of any of the crimes her husband stands accused of, either by police or by family. Also around this time, there was reportedly another incident. Now, in this incident, a full 5-gallon gas can with a wet rag stuffed in the nozzle was found next to Carrie's mom's car. I mean, if you're going to threaten someone, it's still kind of nice to leave them 5 gallons of gas.
But they found it later? Like, that's an extreme failure.
This is a different incident.
Yeah, but there was a gas can, 5 gallons, with a rag in the nozzle. Was the rag singed?
Doesn't say it was singed, just says it was sitting next to her car.
Just in case you wanted to start a car fire.
Just in case.
It's like a public service.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, if I found a 5-gallon can of gasoline full next to my car, I'd be like, who left me this gift?
I would check every corner and then put that shit in my truck.
Yeah. And I did check gas prices, and at the time it just hit a record high of over $4 a gallon.
What?
So like this was kind of nice. I don't know.
A blessing in disguise.
So I have to wonder though, was it the intent really to just leave a full gas can next to the car, or was this person actually planning to commit arson and didn't for some reason? Like maybe a neighbor's lights came on, or they got interrupted by a possible witness driving down the road. I don't know.
Definitely a benevolent citizen that was just like, you know what? I love my neighbors. And gas prices are high. You know, what I'd like to do is provide a little relief. Here's 5 gallons. And I don't want you to get your hands too smelly, so here's a rag in the end of it so you can wipe your hands off. That's very thoughtful.
I think it's pretty nice. Now, if this was Dave, which we don't know, but we know that this would have been before his alleged arson spree began by a couple of years, so maybe the arson spree is an escalation from just threats of arson. We do often see escalation in criminal serial cases, but I don't know. I found the gas can thing baffling.
Maybe he's trying to work out his karma.
I don't know. Now, in a separate incident, Carrie's mother found a threatening note on her car that said, quote, "You're easy to follow. Carrie and Ray, this is not over."
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where was the apostrophe in your?
There. I'm glad I was about to tell you. It had terrible grammar. It actually didn't have an apostrophe. It was spelled Y-O-U-R.
No!
And the writer misspelled Carrie's name. Carrie's name is Carrie, and the writer spelled it Cary.
That's lazy.
Well, if this was her father's doing, as Carrie alleges, was he intentionally misspelling her name because you would expect her own dad to know how to spell her name?
Probably just illiterate.
Or is this, like, somebody else? Like, it made me wonder.
Listen, man. You set your own feet on fire, and then try to stomp out your shoes, and then leave your pants in a gutter, and then whatever the hell we just talked about. No, he's a f***ing idiot.
Maybe it's not out of the question that he spelled his own daughter's name wrong.
This is a bumbling f***ing clown of an arsonist.
Now, another note was left at some point that contained not publicly known information about Carrie's mother's job. Now, I don't know what was included in that note, but when Carrie discussed it with reporters, she said that this should have been her clue that her dad was behind this, because the information included in that note is information that her dad would have known. And when all this harassment started, Carrie had turned to her dad for advice and help because he was a cop. But at this point, it didn't click with her. She didn't suspect her dad. She wouldn't start to suspect her dad until a little later.
She's a good girl.
Now, many of these notes that were left were signed the York Boys, with a Z, which, according to the press, is a gang out of York where Carrie and Ray had lived when the harassment began. But she points out that if it was actually this alleged gang, they wouldn't have had this private information about her mom's job. And what do you have to do to piss off a gang for them to follow you over an hour just to leave a threatening note and a can full of gas?
Did you know that there are police agencies in this world that will absolutely make up gang activity so that they can have a reason to infringe on people's rights?
Okay, well, that dovetails great into what we're going to talk about in just a minute. Allegedly, this person that's doing this wants us to believe that this gang came from York all the way to Odenton, Maryland, just to leave some gas and some threatening notes. So why did Carrie start to suspect her dad? Well, she realized that all of the violence and threats would pick up whenever she started to make efforts to try to regain custody of her child. So let's talk about this alleged gang for a minute. I can find zero mention of them online outside of the stories that are specifically about this case. So if they have a web presence, they're definitely not optimizing their content for Google searches.
Okay, well, that's not like a qualification for a gang.
No, that's why I put it in there. I thought it was funny. And it doesn't appear that there's really much social media presence that I could find. I did find a couple groups that appear to use a York Boys hashtag, but I couldn't find any that listed a location in or around York, Pennsylvania.
So you found a poser.
A lot of people that use the hashtag didn't include locations, so. Also, my algorithm is absolutely effed now, and if I wasn't already on some kind of list, I definitely am now.
Hey, list lookers. Come and get me. I got something so fun for you.
Anyway, so I did find references to gangs with similar names, and I did find that there are several organized gangs, and I'm using quotes here, which I'll explain, in the York, Pennsylvania area. So I found some stories about these so-called gangs, but they're not what I normally think about when I think of a gang. I think of like those big gangs that you hear about in crime TV shows, and these are not that.
Like the Capones?
Like, I don't want to say any gang names on them.
I do. I want to say some.
Like the Bloods and the Crips and the... Who are the...
Oh, okay.
Who are the Latin Kings and the... I don't even know them all.
Sounds like the worst movie.
This is why I don't write movies.
You're a better podcaster than a movie
Okay.
writer.
Well, those are the kinds of gangs I think of when I think of a gang.
That's not a bad thing to think of, though. That's exciting.
Okay, so in the articles that I read about the gangs that were plaguing the York area, it sounds like these are basically a bunch of territorial neighborhood boys that pick fights with boys that are territorial over other parts of the neighborhood. And the article specifically talked about most of these groups having very strong family connections, as in many of the members are half-brothers or cousins or related somehow. So they do have some reports of some skirmishes, including shooting up cars, and then obviously there's some fights, but I only found one incidence of a gang-related shooting in recent history in that area. That doesn't mean there aren't more. It's just that this one was the only one that hit the top of a Google search when I searched about York, PA gang activity. Now there is a gang called the New York Boys, with a Z, and they reportedly began in the Bronx and have spread as far south as Richmond, according to press I found. And I found some people that were using the York Boys hashtag as far south as South Carolina, but I couldn't specifically find where they'd been reported to be active in York. So I admit, I didn't research this end of it super thoroughly, but I wanted to include that what I tried to find because it seems like it's relevant. Carrie's assertion that a street skirmish gang would have been unlikely to follow someone that they had friction, not beef, with to another state,
not beef,
to leave them threatening gifts of gasoline and shoot up a truck again. This could be my extreme aversion to large car rides talking because of my arthritic hip, but I don't think that this York Boys gang would have followed them to Odenton to continue the harassment. But maybe I'm not the best judge of what a gang would or wouldn't do.
They would have followed you to Valhalla.
Alright. Now, Carrie reports that her father told her if she filed for divorce from her husband, the one that allegedly threatened to kill her back in 2006, that she could have custody of her child back. And Carrie did divorce True Love in 2009, and that's when she moved back to York, PA. Now, reportedly, her dad did not know she had moved back to York, but he did know that she had gotten a job at a gym near where she lived. But he apparently is thinking she still lives in Odenton. Now, incidentally, around this time, when Carrie told her dad about getting a job at a gym but not telling him where she'd moved, a gym near her mother's home, and she'd been living with her mother, was shot up. Now, Carrie says it was at this point that she finally started to suspect her dad, and according to the press report, he is listed as a suspect in that case. Now, other suspects also include Carrie's ex-husband and, of course, the York Boys. With a Z. Now, later, Crawford did learn that Carrie had actually moved, and she was working in a gym called Big Vanilla.
With a Z.
No Z. A gym called Big Vanilla for a gym name. Would you work at a place called Big Vanilla?
I would be Mr. Big Vanilla.
Okay, well,
I would make people call me Mr.
When Crawford found out that Carrie was working at a gym called Big Vanilla in Pasadena, there was a shooting at that gym, and another note left signed by the York Boys.
Did you get my little joke?
No.
Because made people made the new call him sir.
Oh, yeah?
I'd make them call me Mr. Vanilla.
Mr. Vanilla.
Like, I would smack the chocolate right out your mouth.
Wow. I'm gonna have to put a lot of ducks in this episode.
That's whole vanilla bean action right there. You don't want to face that.
Now, during all this, Carrie and her husband both had been victims of threats and random shootings at cars and buildings. Now, her ex-husband told reporters that this was around the time, around that second gym shooting, that he agreed to sign over his parental rights to allow the Crawfords to adopt the child. And as soon as he did that, he said, and this is a direct quote, "Ever since I signed the papers, it was like I had another page in life written for me. Everything stopped." End quote.
That's deep.
Now, in September of 2010, Crawford's attorney sent Carrie a note asking her to step down from her efforts to regain custody of her child, citing these threats and violence that had been occurring. Now, Carrie says that she believed that her dad was responsible, but she also believed that it was going to continue until she signed the papers. So she did. And the shootings and the threats and the gifts of gasoline stopped.
Oh.
Now, at this point, if Carrie wants access to her child, she has to play nice with the Crawfords. And so this puts Dave in a position of power over his daughter, which sort of seems to go with the personality that the prosecution presented in trial of him, demanding respect and demanding that things go according to his idea of the way they should be. Now, Carrie eventually remarries, and apparently the relationship with her dad does improve enough that when her dad suffered a heart attack in 2018, which would have been in the middle of this 10-year arson spree we've been talking about, she and her new husband moved into the home with Dave and Mary and Carrie's child so that they could help take care of Dave as he convalesced. So Carrie supposedly went from being convinced that her dad was terrorizing her and shooting up buildings that she's in to moving in with him. And she says in this interview that it was only by playing by Dave's rules that she could have access to her kids. So, I mean, I guess maybe I can understand.
That's a diabolical play on need.
And by living there, she said that she got to have, the most access to her child that she's ever had since the child was an infant. And in the interest of trying to be unbiased, I can see how the daughter of a police chief who's married to a county prosecutor might feel powerless to cross her dad and stepmom. Now, after her divorce, Carrie did become a domestic violence advocate, so it seems like she was likely the victim of domestic violence, and given what we know about her volatile first marriage, we know that victims of this kind of abuse often have feelings of powerlessness too, which may play more into this role where she sort of kowtowed over to her dad. She didn't stand up for her rights.
No, I don't think anyone could reasonably expect her to.
I don't think they could either. That's what I wanted to make sure that we were including that. And remember that Carrie is fighting against a system where Dave and his wife are widely regarded as trusted people. One thing Carrie does say is that while she was living in the Crawfords' home following Dave's heart attack, she got to see firsthand the, quote, toxic environment, unquote, in the home. Now, she doesn't give any examples, but the statement did not come as a shock to me. Do you remember when Dave wanted to charge Justin, his stepson, rent, and Mary reportedly said that she couldn't do anything about it? And then there's all kinds of possibilities surrounding that statement, but one possibility is that Mary was also a victim of Dave's overbearing and authoritarian attitude herself.
And one was that she really supported it and
there is
was
one that
using him as a fall guy.
Yeah. But we just don't know. Now, no one's come out and said that, but I think it is a possibility to consider that if that's the case, and we don't know that that's the case, but it's possible that even if Mary did know about Dave's actions, or even some of them, and again, we don't know that she did because Dave had a room on a separate floor of the house, that she may not have come forward out of fear. So I have to say that I was already sort of feeling like there was a possibility that Mary's a victim of Crawford's and all of this, and that she was afraid to cross him. And Carrie's allegations sort of make me wonder that even a little bit more, if it's a possibility. So 2006 is when the threats and violence against Carrie and her husband begin, and they stretch through until 2010 when Carrie signed the adoption papers.
You say 2 to 10?
2006 until 2010.
6, okay, 4 years.
Now, the entire time this was happening, Crawford was the chief of police in the Laurel Police Department. Now, he retired at the end of 2010, so just months after these alleged attacks and threats against Carrie stop is when we have the first arson that he's accused of in 2011. Then in 2018, Crawford suffers a heart attack, Carrie and her husband move in with them, and at some point before the police serve the search warrant on Crawford in 2021, she and her husband move out.
11 years later?
I don't know when. I know she moved in 2018, but I don't know how long she lived there. I just know she wasn't living there still in 2021 when the search warrant was served. But yes, the alleged arson spree is a 10-year arson spree. So after police searched Crawford's home, Carrie reports that they came to talk to her about her dad, and her exact quote in this newspaper article is, quote, "When detectives showed up to talk to me after the raid, I was disappointed, but I wasn't surprised." Carrie also said about her dad that he was a funny and charming guy, but he was a Jekyll and Hyde type of guy, and unless you had crossed him, you would not know what he's capable of. Since Crawford's arrest, Carrie has petitioned the court to restore her custody of her child, and in her petition, as in, this is Carrie's allegation, not mine, she states that Mary Crawford knew or should have known about her husband's alleged crimes. But again, Mary Crawford isn't charged with any crimes, and she had a bedroom on a separate floor, so David could have easily come and gone without her knowledge. However, there is one fire that Crawford is accused of in which the victim had no known association directly with David Crawford. And as we are well aware, Crawford's alleged motive in all the fires that we've covered has been revenge. But on March 5th, 2017, so the year before his heart attack, at 3:50 a.m., officials responded to a vehicle fire in Ellicott City, Maryland. A 2014 Toyota Camry belonging to Erica Byrne's mother was parked in front of Erica's home, and it had been burned. Now, investigators were baffled by the fire because the car hadn't been driven in several days. In addition, the fire started at the rear of the car, which is highly unusual. Normally, if you have a car fire that's the result of some sort of issue with the car, the fire begins near the front of the vehicle or in the engine compartment. So who was Erica Byrne? And if she wasn't associated with Dave Crawford, why would he target her aside from her very apt name, Byrne, as the victim of an arson?
Oh, maybe she had a nice booty.
I don't know anything about her booty, but I do know that she was associated with someone that David Crawford knew very well. She was associated with one Mary Crawford, blushing bride of our erstwhile police chief. Erica Byrne was the executive director for an organization called Voices for Children. Now, this group trains people to be a CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocate. In court cases that involve children, these kids are appointed a special advocate that is assigned to represent the child's best interest. So, as an example, let's say there's a divorce proceeding in which domestic violence is alleged. The CASA would be there to advocate for the child's best interest in the proceedings to determine custody. As an attorney, and somebody that was likely familiar with family court due to her own efforts along with her husband to gain custody of Carrie's child, on paper it seems like this would be a perfect volunteer opportunity for Mary Crawford. So she applied to the program, and she was accepted, and she began the training. Now, we can't know Mrs. Crawford's motivations to become a CASA, but we do know that Carrie had reportedly attempted on several occasions to regain custody of her child, and while her motivations absolutely could have been completely altruistic, it's also possible that this was a move on her part to strengthen her position in the court's eyes as an ideal guardian of Carrie's child.
Yeah, people do that. Sometimes when they're accused of abuse, they'll start a chapter of Parents Against Child Abuse.
Now, even if that was the case, we have limited information about Carrie, just what was indicated in the press. So it's feasible that it was in the best interest of the child to not be in Carrie's custody. I don't know. We don't know what, if any, other outside issues may have factored into the family court's decision to allow Mary and Dave to have custody of the child, but whatever her motivations, Mary was accepted into the CASA program, and she attended the first 3 training sessions. However, in that 3rd training session, Mrs. Byrne testified in court that Mary Crawford apparently took strong exception to discussions about white privilege. Now, Byrne testified, quote, "We teach about implicit bias and white privilege so the CASAs understand how this impacts the children they'll be working with in foster care," unquote. Now, in court, the prosecution tried to get the witness to talk about that dialogue and whether it was, quote, typical of the kind of dialogue they normally have in these trainings, and Mrs. Byrne answered no before the defense could object. That objection was sustained. So instead, the defense brought out an email that was sent to Mary Crawford from Erica Byrne on November 1st of 2016. In this email, Erica is asking Crawford if she's going to continue the training as a volunteer for CASA. And she said, look, if this isn't a good fit for you, then we would respect her decision to back out of the program. Byrne also testified that she then followed up with Mary Crawford via phone, and that on this phone call, Mary opted to discontinue the program. And Byrne testified that that phone conversation, Mary Crawford came across as angry. Now, as a result of that conversation and Crawford withdrawing from the program, Mrs. Byrne filled out a volunteer evaluation form, which is apparently standard procedure for anyone leaving the program. And in that form, she indicated that Mary was dismissed from the program because she wasn't a good fit. And that was dated November 8th, 2016. The fire at Mrs. Byrne's home of the car in the driveway occurred 4 months later. Now, the vehicle that burned actually didn't belong to Erica Byrne. It belonged to her mother, Her mother had gone on vacation and flown out of a nearby airport, so she had parked the car at her daughter's house before she flew out of town. And that's why we know the car had not been driven in several days. Now, hearing this, you might be thinking that while the MO of the car fire is similar, there's no video of this fire, and so how do we know for sure that this is even connected if the victim didn't know the defendant, just the defendant's wife? Well, it seems as though the connection here is weak sauce at best. However, we're going to find out that the evidence that ties Dave to this fire is identical to the evidence found during the search warrant that ties him to the fire at Marty Fleming's house, the fire at Richard McLaughlin's house, the 3 fires at Justin and Miriam Shearstrom's home, the fire at Scott Crawford's house, and the evidence that appears to indicate that his stepbrother Mark Kratzer was about to be another fire victim. So, remember, Dave's not accused officially of all of these crimes, but if we're just going to tally up what we've discussed, that brings us to 7 fires of 12 that we're going to be covering, plus at least 4 shootings, written threats, of course, and sinister gifts of free gasoline. And then there's also the fact that around the time of Dave's retirement, somebody fired a gun through the front window of the Laurel City Administrator's home, which was Marty Fleming's boss. As far as I know, Dave has never been accused of or tied to that incident at all. So there's multiple pieces of evidence to consider, but one of the most compelling that police found during the search was a coded list found on Dave's cell phone. What was this list? Well, it was a list of names, and the names on the list included Marty Fleming, Richard McLaughlin, Justin with a number 3 after it, and remember, Justin had been the victim of 3 separate fires, Scott, Mark Kratzer, as well as several other names. Now, you might note that the name Erica Byrne is missing from this list, and you're not wrong. Her name didn't appear on the list. What did appear on the list that tied Crawford to this fire were 2 words: white privilege. So taking a little leap here, it's reasonable to presume that David would have been told about the disagreement Mary had with Erica over the term white privilege, and that he may not have known Erica Byrne's name. However, he probably didn't have to go far to figure it out, because she runs this program and it's all over their website. Now, he could have gotten enough information out of Mary about this incident to target Erica Byrne, and Mary Crawford could continue to be unaware of her husband's actions. It's possible, yes. Recall that Crawford slept in a bedroom separate from his wife. The bedroom was on a different level of the house. It had a separate entrance and exit. And now we know that Crawford would have come home from at least the first fire sans pants, and possibly bearing some pretty nasty burns on his legs. So how could Mary not have known this about her husband? Well, if they're sleeping in separate bedrooms, it's feasible that he could have hidden any burns that he sustained from her.
Not from everyone.
And in case you're thinking that a coded list on an iPhone isn't proof of anything, I'll give you one more nugget of information. Recall that the arsonist set his pants on fire at the Marty Fleming fire. 17 days after that fire, someone using David Crawford's email address made a post on a medical advice board online. In that post, he explained that he'd suffered burns on his legs approximately 2 weeks prior and wanted to know how long he could expect the pain to last.
We see you, Dave. We see you, Dave.
Later, police would get a warrant to view and photograph Dave Crawford's legs, and the photos show burn scars on his legs consistent with the type of burns he described in that medical posting. So we'll be getting into more of the evidence that police found that they assert implicates Crawford in these fires. However, to my knowledge, there is no evidence to tie him to his daughter Carrie's allegations that he's responsible for these multiple shootings of innocent buildings and vehicles. And it doesn't mean that police didn't find any evidence, just that it wasn't admissible in the arson trial. And while I do not have the pretrial motions, there was one incident that was caught on the courtroom recordings where the lawyer and judge are chatting prior to the jury coming in. And on this day, the judge appears to reference some people that are sitting in the audience and asks, are they related to the custody case? And the prosecution answers yes, but she points out, she says, we're staying far, far away from any references to that case. So that seemed to imply to me that it's possible that the allegations related to the custody case were possibly discussed in pretrial motions and deemed inadmissible.
Just let them do their thing, man.
So, will the investigation into the threats against Carrie ever yield an arrest? I don't know. But I do know we still have another 5 fires to cover and a mountain of forensic evidence to discuss, so be sure to join us next week for part 5.
Dude, you said so many things that I've got a huge boner for destroying abusers. I have a great life. Miniature golf. I love miniature golf. We come highly recommended. And then when they're like, we're having such a good time, I tickle them more and we have a greater time.
But did you hear about the news story this week that some sailors installed Starlink on a naval destroyer?
Negative, I did not.
And they got caught.
All the crap this week, I didn't hear that.
And they got caught because they named the network Stinky.
No. I love it. My boys.
Fire protection engineer, not just a career choice, a public service. Hey, and Chad has his head back.
There's really nice hair right now. It's very curly. He looks like your favorite boy band guy.
I don't think I've ever referred to Slash as a boy band guy.
You don't think Guns N' Roses was a boy band?
No, not really.
You're so naive, my dear. Jesus Christ, am I supposed to have an opinion about that? I am his Brad Pitt.
You were on a horsey.
If you know, you know.
I have no idea what we're talking about.
I have a sensitive tummy, though.
Today, man.
You look like you just got done fighting something for your life. I'm not funny yet.
What do you want me to tickle you?
Maybe I'm crazy.
I'm going to need you to remember that. It's going to come back.
I think you're crazy.
Don't sue us, Gnarls Barkley.
Now, when you said, should I go, I automatically assumed you meant, go get me a beer.
I did not mean that.
I feel like if you rewind it and think about it a little bit, it might be what you meant. Really, really apply your mind to it.
My hip hurts and the stairs are killing me today.
Kneel before my terrible power! I'm pretty sure I had a point in my pants. That's why you blame the editor.
Wow, my chair is really squeaky today. What is happening?
Rich Corinthian leather. Seems rude.
I'm pretty rude. I can't say it.
You can. Potential.
Now this petition for temporary custody.
Do it again.
According to the news article at the time, there had been some tuna with a neighbor.
Man, damn. Give one episode. Can we just do one? Chicken of the sea. You don't want to face my vanilla bean.
Okay.
You can cut this out.
Okay. What did I write? And this is a direct quote. Ever since I signed the... Good grief.
That was Southern Maryland coming out.
And this is a direct quote. Ever since Jesus.
No, that was me.
Okay. Anarchy.
I didn't say that word.
Not anarchy. It's the never-ending recording. Dream, a dream that's arsonic. I need a luck dragon. Falcor. I always feel free to ramble.
My work is done here.